The dynamic is that the calling is calling to the inner spirit of the person, the genius it used to be called. The Greek word was the daemon. There's lots of names for it in different cultures, but it's an essence inside the soul, and it's a spirit essence. That's what the calling is calling to. And since that inner essence, that inborn spirit is unique, then the calling and the pathways can be unique. And that's another reason why I'm trying to open up the territory of imagination and not restrict it to a hero's journey, because that has limits when you look at it. And it also has exclusions that I think are damaging to too many people in culture. All right. So then I want to call it, because it's a really good word, genius. The Greek word is daimon. They're very similar. But genius in the modern world has come to be something that people think they can measure. You can have a genius IQ, or you can have a genius talent for music, or a talent for business or something. But that's not what it means. It doesn't mean something quantifiable. It means something, a quality in a person that defies quantification. So sometimes the genius of a person does turn out to be a bright intellect or a specific talent. But in other people, it's a surpassing capacity for imagination, or an inspired way of innovation. Or, as I mentioned, someone can have the genius of empathy or the genius of compassion. And so I'm imagining the world wants all those different kinds. And right now the world needs all those different variations of genius, because they lead people to places that others won't go. Those who do healing, those who are called to be healers, usually do not live a heroic life. In the modern world, you get surgeons that are at the top of the medical fields and all that kind of stuff, but that's not healing. That's something else. It's medical procedure. Healing is something else. And so the old word for the healers, the real healers, was the wounded healers. And so when someone lives the calling to be a healer, they are in touch with pain all the time. They encounter things that they can't heal. They become humble. They become closer to the earth. They become closer to the sense of compassion, because they feel the pain of other people, and because there's no heroic way to end the pain of people. So the genius can take many forms. And right now, when all kinds of healing, all kinds of innovation, all kinds of invention are needed, we need as many genius awakenings as possible. And I'm suggesting that when the world is in this kind of collapsing shape and in great need, that there's also an acceleration of calling. It's very hard to find satisfaction in a world that is so full of uncertainty and conflict. And so rather than seeking it outside, the idea is you seek it inside. And it's important then to realize inside is this unique genius of each person. And that's what the calling is trying to reach and awaken and inspire. William Blake put it this way: threads of genius and purpose are present in everyone, but may only become visible when something creative is attempted. In other words, we attempt to be creative in our life, we have a much greater possibility of revealing our own genius threads and the purpose of our lives and hearing the call. So Carl Jung put it this way, and this has to do with where do you look for the genius. He said, genius hides behind the wound. So in other words, if you get to the place where a person is wounded, you're actually close to their genius. Genius hides behind the wound. When I'm close to in my own wounded state, even though it doesn't feel that way, I'm actually closer to the genius, because genius and the deep wounds of the soul reside together. And that means that, and going back to the question that someone had, answering the call will awaken our genius and stir our wounds. And so the path of awakening involves both becoming more conscious of who we are in our essence and how we are intended to engage life and give to life, but it also puts us on the role of healing. Answering the call puts us on the role of awakening and also on the road of healing. And that's what we're supposed to be doing in this world. I mean, there's all kinds of modern ideas and all kinds of modern opportunities and da-da-da. But the human soul is here to grow and to transform, to awaken and become aware of its own inner nature and learn to live and express and give from that inner essence. That's the old idea. I'm sticking with that one. And so then Horace, the old Roman writer, put it this way: adversity reveals genius, prosperity conceals it. We find ourselves in adverse times. So the implication would be there's going to be more calling, more revelation of genius. And prosperity can conceal exactly those things. When a person thinks they have everything, they can't hear the call. They think they've arrived, when in fact they may be just in a way station in a materialistic territory. So, so going back to the nature of genius, which means the spirit that's already there, and I mentioned that the Greek term that was similar was daemon, either spelled D-A-E-M-O-N or D-A-I-M-O-N. And that's an interesting term because the daemon is the unique spirit of each person seen through Greek tradition. But when the daemon is not related to, when the daemon is not accepted, when the call connected to it is rejected or suppressed, then the daemon turns into a demon. That which is trying to awaken us, in us, and give us our own particular type of vitality and creativity, if it is suppressed, rejected, or dismissed, does not simply disappear, it can turn into the demon. And so that's another way of saying how important it is that a person awaken to what naturally calls to them, because then if a person doesn't do it, it doesn't mean they live a neutral life. It means that they are living closer to the demonic side of their life than to the genius creative side of their life. That's how ancient people saw it, that this was a serious thing. And you can see that in the cold-heartedness that grows inside modern cultures, in the willingness of many people in modern Western societies, but also other places, to reject other people, to denigrate other people, to not only disparage people, but to be cruel and mean to them. That's become an aspect of modern cultures. And you could say that's the demonic side of the unlived genius callings. Because when a person responds to the call of their life, they will wind up giving something meaningful to others. That's the old argument. I can't prove it, but I like the idea that what is inside people at the deepest sense and the depth of the soul is of its own nature beneficial to life. And so it's worth struggling for, but when it is not struggled for, it then manifests in ways that are inauthentic and demeaning to humanity. Okay. As this indigenous inner spirit of our life, the genius is the source of our genuine identity. When we fail to recognize it, it creates great identity problems. One way to understand the massive identity problems happening in major Western cultures is people who are not connected to themselves in some kind of inner essence way are now believing anything that anyone makes up. I'm talking about conspiracy theories. I'm talking about political movements that intend to rise by putting other people down. In order to do that, a person has to already think that those other people don't count. But in order to think other people don't count, we have to first feel inside ourselves that we don't count. And that causes people to believe in outside things that don't make sense, but fill a certain gap in their life. And then usually that outside thing means you can only be better by other people having a worse condition. And then there you are, the us and them has happened. You can have us and them when people are working on their own genuine inner identity. What you get is us and we. And so I'm trying to say that we don't improve the world by agreeing on one idea. We improve the world by each of us finding the core ideas and the deep imaginations in our own lives, and that those lead to meaningful callings, and that those lead to meaningful pathways. And when that happens, everyone starts to get a little benefit from it. And the next thing, the collective changes because of the awakening of individuals within it. That's why I'm so interested in calling and suggesting that when things get very broken as they are now, the calling can get through more readily. This inner genius also has been called the guardian angel. In other words, when we find the connection to the genius, it causes us to step into territories that are bigger and can seem threatening or be certainly overwhelming, but it also acts as a guide. So the genius or the daemon is a guide from within that also helps protect us. We are less protected when we are not living the life we have been called to live. It's not that we can avoid all dangers and all, but we get a certain kind of protection by being in alignment with our inner soul and the spirit of our own life. You get protection out of that. I'm saying in a world where protection is harder and harder to find, rather than seeking outside security, what we're really being called to do is to find the natural security of our own inner lives. And just having said that, another thing about genius, and I'm talking about genius because that's what the calling is calling to. Whereas a person has to grow up, the genius comes full blown, inborn, full blown, fully grown. The genius is there from the beginning as it's not a human element, it's spirit, and it's there full born. So that's why you can have prodigies sometimes, child prodigies, or a person, responds to the call and suddenly everything changes and they're able to create in ways that they never imagined. They're able to invent, to innovate, to see and understand, because the genius itself, the daemon itself, is full born and full blown. And so the old statement was, genius is born, not made. And in saying that, I'm speaking against the idea that if you do something 1,000 times, you can become a master. Maybe you can, but to master oneself, a person has to awaken to what's inside, not simply repeat some practice or outside activity. That's how I'm saying it. Okay. Just to related to that, so each person has an inner genius, and that means that each person is gifted in some way. It's not that everyone is a genius, that everyone has some genius. And having some genius means having some gifts or talents. The old word was talents. And it's interesting to me that if you change 2 letters in the word talent, you get latent. Talent means the gift a person has to give, and latent means the gift is hidden or suppressed, and it hasn't come out yet. And so there's a beautiful connection between latency and talent. And I just find that part of the poetry of genius. So a child simply grows up, but in order to become a full person, then that child has to be born again. And that's the second birth, the soul birth, the psychological birth, and the spiritual birth. And that is another way to refer to the awakening of the soul. And that's another way to characterize the condition in which the calling comes in.